Hey folks, Seth here. As we watch cities burn, statues being torn down, and calls to defund the police, if you haven't already, it may be time to think about personal protection. Guns Etc. has 10,200 square feet of guns, ammo, safes, and a staff that will work with you to find the best firearm for your situation. So stop by their huge store in Mesa or click on gunsetcetera.com and have access to over $400 million in firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy August 18th, 2020. In his critique on Spinoza, the political philosopher Leo Strauss wrote, quote, "It is safer to try and understand the low in light of the high than the high in light of the low. In doing the latter, one necessarily distorts the high, whereas in doing the former, one does not deprive the low of the freedom to reveal itself fully as to what it is." Close quote. Yes, it dawns on me. Never has such a thing been said before on talk radio, much less never has a radio show ever opened up with that mouthful or a citation to Spinoza. We call this fun. But keep that dictum in mind for a moment. To repeat, it is safer to try and understand the low in light of the high than the high in light of the low. In doing the latter, one necessarily distorts the high, whereas in doing the former, one does not deprive the low of the freedom to reveal itself fully as to what it is. This brings me to the Democratic Party convention that kicked off last night, especially the speeches by Michelle Obama, Bernie Sanders, Andrew Cuomo, and Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. Famous line of Michelle's from an earlier Democratic convention was, "When they go low, we go high." We Republicans being the they. The thing about these bonmot is that they are actually rarely true. The Democrats ongoingly go very low, whether they play race cards or deal them from the bottom of the deck, whether they mock us or whether they try to scare the wits out of voters based on the phantasmagorical political chimeras they invent. Last night, Michelle Obama doubled down on the famous line, saying, quote, "Over the past 4 years, a lot of people have asked me, when others are going so low, does going high still really work? My answer, going high is the only thing that works, because when we go low, when we use those same tactics of degrading and dehumanizing others, we just become part of the ugly noise that's drowning out everything else. We degrade ourselves. We degrade the very causes for which we fight. Going high means standing fierce against hatred, while remembering that we are one nation under God. And if we want to survive, we've got to find a way to live together and work together across our differences. And going high means unlocking the shackles of lies and mistrust with the only thing that can truly set us free, the cold, hard truth," close quote. There's so much to unpack here. I'll start by stating there is nothing more degrading or dehumanizing, to use her words, than calling someone a racist, a tyrant, a bigot, when they're not. Never mind, what did she say? Fierce hatred? Those terms used to be, shall we say, rare or special or unique because it is unwise to cavalierly and indiscriminately just throw them around. But the Democrats have weaponized words like those to a fare thee well, and it is commonplace to hear those terms describing us and our president in rallies, on the streets, in talk shows, and in the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate. In fact, it is the essence of dehumanizations, for by labeling someone as so indecent and as contemptible for views they do not hold, but views that are the essence of the worst crimes against humanity, as calling someone a racist or bigot or tyrant is to write someone out of the realm of democratic political participation or reasonable democratic participation. It is to create an extremist where there is not one. It is to write them out of the body politic, to marginalize them and deracinate them. In short, to dehumanize them. It's clever. You put someone beyond the pale of respectability, you can then silence them and make them illegitimate. And that's exactly what the Democrats have done from day one of the Trump presidency. They've been doing it throughout every Republican presidency, but they've tuned the volume up this time. To him and about us. It's their standard coin of the realm now, and they lecture us about decency. It's kind of like that expression, the louder they speak of honor, the faster we should count our spoons. How do you stand fast against hatred when you seethe with it. This is the mark of every revolutionary socialist in history. Find a political enemy, scapegoat him and his movement, and write him out of society, be they bourgeoisie, the petite bourgeoisie, or of some disfavored ethnicity or religion subject to your exploitation. Now, recall two of Saul Alinsky's rules. Whenever possible, go outside the expertise of the enemy. Look for ways to increase insecurity, anxiety, and uncertainty. Seeing any of that? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with the weaponization of a public health issue that Andrew Cuomo tells us comes from Europe. The other rule from Alinsky, quote, the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. More terrifying than the thing itself. Yes, indeed. For if Trump is Hitler, can you imagine how lovely it actually must have been to live in Germany in the 1930s? I'll guarantee you this. There's not a Jew or Gypsy in the world who wouldn't have given his eye teeth to live under a Führer named Donald Trump. Heck, if they did, there'd be something on the order of 66% more Jews in the world today. Anyway, stop lecturing us on going low and going high, as you have reduced these measurements to nothing more than a relativistic, handy rhetorical trick. And it is a trick, and it is relativism. I'll give you an idea of what relativism is, because I fear we've lived so long with it we hardly recognize it anymore. A man was beaten to possible or near death in Portland for the world to see. Sunday. He was minding his business until he drove into a jungle of protests and riots. He tried to help a woman. That used to be called chivalry. He was beaten and his head kicked like a soccer ball. If you want a whiff of what true Gestapo tactics are, if you want a true analogy to the 1930s Germany, you would denounce that. Hell, we wouldn't know his name, don't you think? If there weren't double standards right now, we'd know his name by now. We still don't. So the relativism. Representative James Clyburn was asked about it on Fox News this morning. The best he could muster was this, quote, that's not how John Lewis and I did things. We believed in nonviolent protest, close quote. First, what protest? This wasn't a protest. Second, okay. Asked to denounce it again, Clyburn said, again, that's not how John Lewis and I did things. He could not denounce it. He would not bring himself to denounce it. He just said he did things differently back in the day. Kind of like the Cambridge student G.K. Chesterton told us about, who was given a cannibal for a roommate, and when asked why he didn't engage in cannibalism, the Cambridge student could only muster, we just don't do that here. All rational arguments, all reasoning, all sense of right and wrong is gone. Our society has been drained and deprived of it, and it's not a very safe thing. It's not a very good thing. For now, as you see, we can no longer measure the low in light of the high. We don't any longer know how to describe high or even denounce low. We don't recognize the differences. Good and bad are just personal preferences, as are right and wrong. That's not how we did things, indeed. Indeed. So what are the things we do now? What are the things we are being asked to get used to? We are asked to believe, per Michelle Obama last night, that Donald Trump is, quote, the wrong president for our country. He has had more than enough time to prove that he can do the job, but he is clearly in over his head, she said. Her husband took unemployment to over 10%. Donald Trump got unemployment down to a record low of 3.5%. He increased the earnings of the middle class and obtained record low employment, not just for all Americans, but particularly for minority Americans. And he loved bragging about that. So much so that a black political exit movement was born around his policies, called Blexit. Anyone recall Republican Protestants for Obama starting as an exit movement, an exodus movement, because he proved himself so able to peel off traditionally Republican constituencies, Obama? Donald Trump achieved more Middle East peace than any other president since the 1970s, and did so without paying billions of dollars, or Dangeld, to terrorist regimes. But of course, he's proven himself not up to the job, according to Michelle Obama. And all of this with a daily, unremitting set of efforts to impeach him, and a willing media that backs the opposition. He's in over his head, she tells us. Come now, let us slay him and see what comes of his dreams. I guess when you're thrown into a pit, you are in over your head, after all. But they did the throwing. This we have gotten used to. It's not healthy. I'll tell you what else we've gotten used to. Civil and civic safety. A contractor was talking to me as I had Fox News on in my house this morning. The scenes from Portland were airing, and he said to me, we're just so far removed from that here and so insulated. It's easy to forget what's going on in other parts of the country. We're really fortunate. You know who used to say things like that? The people of Portland, the people of Seattle, other parts of the country. This is all our country. And when the local officials refuse to stop the violence, indeed egging it on, and the unqualified president sends in federal troops, the blame is against the federal troops. As Nancy Pelosi called them, stormtroopers, Nazis again. The true Nazis are kicking in the heads of the chivalrous, meanwhile. But one has to understand moral distinctions, and not very hard ones at that, to see all that. In 1978, George Will wrote about one Saul Goldstein, who lived in Skokie, Illinois. He was born in Lithuania and watched, as a young boy, Nazis throw his mother down a well with 50 other women, and then buried those women, including Saul's mom, alive. Saul, understood what true danger was, which is why he opposed Nazis marching through Skokie in 1978. He thought it was dangerous to be confused about moral values in America, more dangerous than allowing Nazis to march or not allowing them to march in his neighborhood. If they were to have their way, more people would be thrown down wells or have their heads kicked in by violent mobs. It starts with noxious ideology that can be roughly described as relativism. Nothing is right or wrong. Nothing is high or low. That's not how we did it. We just don't do that here until we do. And then Portland becomes Portland. Seattle becomes Seattle. And then Atlanta and Chicago become Atlanta and Chicago. And then, without a rest, Scottsdale and Phoenix and Augusta, and you can plumb your maps. Decadence, like rioting, like relativism, is not a good thing to get used to any more than moral confusion is. I'm Seth Leibson. The lines are open, and we'll be right back.